I'm Sergeant Ramsey. I'm the one that called you. Thank you for coming. I'm sorry to call you. Listen, we had a report of a disturbance at your house, and there were shots fired. Is your husband Michael? Okay, I'm sorry to tell you, man. He's been killed. He's been killed, man. I'm sorry. Listen.
It's a warm August morning in Boynton Beach, Florida. The streets are quiet, the kind of quiet that belongs to a neighborhood where nothing bad is supposed to happen. Then, the silence breaks. Police cruisers race down the street, sirens wailing, yellow tape flutters in the humid air. Something terrible has happened inside one of those pastel houses. A young woman pulls up, her car still running. Her face is pale, her voice trembling. Detectives approach. One of them delivers the words no one ever wants to hear. "Ma'am, your husband's been killed." She collapses. Tears, screams, desperation, every move, every sound soaked in heartbreak. To anyone watching, it feels genuine, the grief of a wife whose world just ended. But in this story, nothing is what it seems. Because minutes later, inside the police station, everything changes. A door opens, and the man she thought was dead walks in, alive, standing right in front of her. Her name, Dalia Dippolito. His name, Michael Dippolito. And from that moment, the illusion shatters. What began as a tragedy now spirals into a web of deceit, betrayal, and calculated manipulation. Was Dalia a heartless architect of her husband's downfall, or a woman trapped inside a lie too deep to escape? This is the story of how love turned lethal, how trust became a weapon, and how one morning phone call exposed a truth darker than anyone imagined. If you're drawn to stories like this, real cases of love, betrayal that reveal the darker side of human nature, kindly subscribe to True Crime Wound. Your support helps us bring more untold true crime stories to light, stories that make you think, question, and feel every twist. Because here at True Crime Wound, we don't just tell stories, we open the wounds of truth. At first glance, it looked like a love story, a chance encounter between two people who seemed to fill the cracks in each other's broken lives. Dalia Mohammed Dippolito, elegant, confident, magnetic. She wasn't the kind of woman you'd easily forget. Every step, every smile, carried a quiet calculation behind the charm. She knew how to read people, how to make them feel seen, desired, needed. Born and raised in New York, she had ambition stitched into her very being. Friends described her as driven, sharp-tongued, and unafraid of control. She liked order. She liked things and people that obeyed it. And when she wanted something, she didn't wait for it to come to her. She went after it. Michael Dippolito was her opposite, or maybe her perfect complement. A man trying to rewrite the story of his own mistakes. He'd served time for financial fraud, a conviction that had cost him everything. When he got out, he wasn't just looking for love. He was looking for someone who would make him feel like he was still worth saving. And then came Dalia. They met in 2008, almost by chance. A personal trainer's office, a few casual exchanges. And soon it was like the universe had decided to give them both a redo. She made him feel seen again, like he was more than the sum of his past. She laughed at his jokes, touched his arm just long enough to make him forget the shame that followed him everywhere, and in return he gave her something she had always wanted: security, admiration, control over a man who needed her. Their chemistry was undeniable, fast, passionate, intoxicating. Within weeks they were inseparable. He bought her gifts, handed over keys, gave her access to his accounts. Not because she asked, but because he wanted to prove he could still be trusted, that he could be the man she believed he was. To him, Dalia was redemption. To her, Michael was opportunity. Friends warned him she was moving too fast, too smooth. But love, when it's desperate, doesn't listen to reason. He told them, "She's different. She makes me feel alive." They married in February 2009, a quick courthouse ceremony that seemed spontaneous but felt almost rehearsed. The perfect picture, the beautiful young wife and the man rebuilding his life. They smiled for photos, held hands in public, whispered, "I love you," like it was a mantra that could erase doubt. But behind closed doors, control began to shift. Dalia monitored his calls, his movements, his friends. She convinced him to transfer his house into her name, a move she called protection from his past creditors. Michael agreed, believing it was love, not leverage. He wanted peace. She wanted power. And yet, in those early months, if you asked anyone on their street, they'd say the same thing. They were the perfect couple. No one saw the tension building beneath the luxury cars, the workout routines, the designer handbags. No one saw the way she would stare at him when he wasn't looking, not with affection, but calculation, or how he tried to ignore the unease that crept in whenever her phone buzzed late at night. He thought it was love holding them together. She knew it was something else entirely. Dalia had a secret, one she wasn't ready to share, and soon her need for control would evolve into something darker. The woman who once promised to protect him would soon become the reason the police showed up at his door. Every story of betrayal begins quietly. In the Dippolito home, it began with trust, and the slow, deliberate way it was broken. By the middle of 2009, Dalia Dippolito had everything she said she wanted. A beautiful house, a husband who adored her, a lifestyle that looked comfortable, even glamorous. But for Dalia, comfort was never enough. Michael Dippolito, on the other hand, believed he had found peace. After years of legal trouble and bad choices, he was grateful just to have someone beside him. Dalia was smart, confident, and seemed to believe in him when few others did. She spoke about their future, new business plans, dreams of starting a family, maybe even expanding their home. To Michael, she was his fresh start. To Dalia, he was a means to something larger, something that only she fully understood. In public, they looked inseparable. At home, it was different. Arguments over money, questions about loyalty, late-night phone calls she couldn't explain. And when Michael raised his concerns, she turned every question into guilt, convincing him that his past mistakes made him paranoid, untrusting, unworthy of her patience. Michael loved her enough to believe he was the problem. That's what made him vulnerable. Around this time, Dalia reconnected with an old boyfriend, Mohammed Shihadeh. He'd known her before the marriage, before the house and the promises. At first, it was just casual contact, small talk, catching up. But soon the conversations changed. Dalia began to tell him stories about her husband, that Michael was violent, controlling, that she felt unsafe. Mohammed listened, unsure what to believe. But then the tone shifted. Her fear turned into suggestion, then into intent. Dalia started asking questions that sounded less like worry and more like planning. "Do you know anyone who can help me get out of this for good?" she asked. Her words carried an edge, calm, almost rehearsed. Mohammed was stunned. At first he thought she was joking, but when she pressed the idea again, it was clear she wasn't. He tried to reason with her, to deflect, to make her reconsider. But Dalia wasn't looking for advice. She was looking for a solution. Eventually, Mohammed made a decision that would change everything. He went to the police. Detectives in Boynton Beach listened carefully as he described Dalia's request. They didn't rush. They planned. They equipped Mohammed's car with hidden cameras and recording devices. Every conversation from that point on would be captured. Every word, every meeting, every promise. When Dalia met him again, she was direct. She wanted her husband gone. She wanted to be sure it couldn't be traced back to her. She wanted it done soon. Her voice on those recordings would later become central to the case, not emotional, not desperate, but deliberate. Cold, measured, certain. Meanwhile, Michael remained unaware. He was still trying to fix his marriage, planning dinners, trying to rebuild the trust that had already been sold for something far darker. He had no idea that his wife was describing his daily routine to someone she believed was arranging his murder. In the shadows, the trap was forming. Dalia's fantasy of freedom was being documented, moment by moment, by the very people she thought would never know. And soon she would meet someone who wasn't who he appeared to be, a man she believed was a professional killer. In truth, he was an undercover officer. And that meeting would set the stage for one of the most shocking betrayals ever captured on camera. Every secret has a moment when it stops being a secret. For Dalia Dippolito, that moment came in the front seat of a silver car parked in Boynton Beach. It was a warm July morning in 2009. The air was still, heavy with Florida heat and tension. Dalia thought she was meeting a professional hitman, someone who could make her husband disappear forever. But what she didn't know was that the man sitting across from her, calm and composed, was an undercover police officer. Every word she spoke was being recorded. The officer played his role perfectly, confident, detached, businesslike. He asked questions the way a professional would. What do you want done? How sure are you about this? Are you ready for what's going to happen? And Dalia, she didn't flinch. There was no hesitation in her voice, no trace of fear or second thoughts. She told him exactly what she wanted, that she wanted her husband dead. She spoke about timing, the house, the money. When asked if she was absolutely certain, she replied with chilling clarity, "I'm 100,000% sure." Those 6 words would echo far beyond that car. They would define her, haunt her, and ultimately destroy her. To the detectives listening nearby, that was the moment everything changed. There was no misunderstanding now, no room for doubt or manipulation. The case was real, and Dalia Dippolito had crossed a line that could never be undone. The next step was to stage the scene. Detectives wanted to catch her reaction, to see how she would respond when she believed her plan had succeeded. It had to be convincing. No mistakes. So early one morning, the Boynton Beach Police Department put their plan into motion. They surrounded the Dippolito home, secured the area, and prepared for the show she didn't know she was part of. A crime scene was staged, yellow tape, flashing lights, officers moving with urgency. Inside, Michael Dippolito, alive and unharmed, was safely hidden away at the police station, completely in disbelief. Then came the call. Detectives told Dalia to come home immediately, that something terrible had happened. Cameras were already rolling when she arrived. She stepped out of her car, confused at first, then horrified. An officer approached her gently, delivering the news. Her husband had been killed. In that instant, her performance began. She gasped, covered her face, cried out in shock. Her knees buckled as officers guided her toward the car. To any ordinary onlooker, it looked like grief. To detectives, it was something else. The climax of a trap months in the making. Moments later, she was brought to the station, still unaware that her husband was alive, still unaware that every word, every tear, every breath had been part of an elaborate sting operation. And then, the door opened. Dalia Dippolito came face to face with the man she believed was dead, Michael Dippolito, very much alive. She froze. The color drained from her face. Her story began to unravel. And as the camera kept rolling, the truth, or her version of it, shifted from denial to confusion to outright desperation. This was no longer a private act of betrayal. It was now a spectacle, recorded, broadcast, and soon to become one of the most infamous moments in American crime television. But the question that would follow for years wasn't just what she did. It was why. The moment the truth came crashing down, the world Dalia Dippolito had carefully built shattered in seconds. What began as a staged murder scene now turned into a real-life arrest, one that millions would later watch in disbelief. As Dalia stood in that interrogation room, her makeup streaked, her breathing shallow, she realized she had lost control of the story. The detectives entered calmly, their tone measured but firm. They told her she was being charged with solicitation to commit first-degree murder. At first, she denied everything. Her voice trembled, her words desperate. "It's not true," she insisted. "There's a mistake. I didn't do anything." But the evidence spoke louder than her words. The recordings, the meeting with the undercover officer, the staged crime scene reaction, all captured, all documented. Every angle told the same story. Then came the most shocking moment of all, the one that no viewer would ever forget. Detectives opened the door and Michael Dippolito walked in. He was alive, standing only a few feet away from the woman who had tried to have him killed. Her face changed instantly, confusion, disbelief, then a trembling attempt to explain. She stammered, claiming it was all part of a setup, that someone else had planned it, that she knew it was a joke. But it was too late. The evidence was irrefutable, and the cameras had captured every frame. Within hours, the footage began circulating online. News outlets across Florida broke the story. A woman accused of hiring a hitman to kill her husband, caught in a police sting operation. By the next morning, the name Dalia Dippolito had gone national. Her photo, once that of a smiling, polished young woman, was now a mugshot splashed across every major network. Boynton Beach became the center of a media frenzy. Neighbors whispered, reporters crowded the streets, and talk shows debated the case as if it were a scripted drama. Michael, meanwhile, faced his own storm. He had barely survived a marriage that turned into a nightmare. To the public, he became both a victim and a symbol, the man who saw his wife try to erase him from existence. Yet even he struggled to understand why. Had he missed the signs? Was the love he believed in ever real? For Dalia, the arrest was only the beginning. As she sat in her cell that night, the glow of the cameras faded, replaced by the cold hum of reality. Her freedom was gone, her reputation destroyed, and her every move, from the fake crime scene to her tearful denial, was now evidence. But the public wasn't finished with her story. They wanted more answers, more drama, more truth, or at least what looked like it. And soon Dalia Dippolito's case would move from the interrogation room to the courtroom, where justice, perception, and performance would collide. The arrest was just the beginning. Behind the flashing cameras and breaking headlines, a far more intricate story was unfolding, one that would expose secret recordings, hidden alliances, and questions about how far justice should go in pursuit of truth. After Dalia's arrest, the Boynton Beach Police Department went into overdrive. Detectives began piecing together every fragment of evidence, phone records, money trails, and surveillance footage that now painted a chilling picture of intent. On their desks sat the recordings from Mohammed Shihadeh, Dalia's former lover and confidant, the man who had gone to the police when her words took a dark turn. In those tapes, her voice was calm, almost casual, as she discussed a plan to make her husband disappear. She spoke of timing, payment, and even how she'd handle the aftermath. Each conversation was logged, dated, and time-stamped, leaving no room for coincidence. The detectives were meticulous. Every meeting Dalia had with the undercover officer was reconstructed, every phone call analyzed. They mapped her words, her movements, even her pauses. To them, the evidence told a clear story, one of calculated betrayal. But while the police built their case, the outside world was already forming its own verdict. The moment the footage leaked, Dalia crying at the fake crime scene, then calmly denying everything in the interrogation room, the court of public opinion exploded. Morning shows replayed it. Late-night hosts joked about it. True crime enthusiasts dissected every frame online. And amid the chaos, a deeper question began to stir. Had the cameras influenced how the case was handled? The presence of a film crew during a live sting operation blurred ethical lines. Critics wondered if the police were too eager to create a spectacle, to stage the perfect moment for national television. Was Dalia Dippolito a manipulative woman caught in her own web, or the victim of a show that blurred justice with performance? The defense would later seize on that very argument, claiming the police and television crew manipulated events for drama. But for now, investigators pressed forward, gathering testimony and building their narrative piece by piece. Mohammed's statement was central. He described a woman torn between love and calculation, someone who could smile sweetly one minute, then coldly plan a killing the next. He admitted he didn't want to believe her at first, but when she pressed him to find a hitman, he knew he had to act. It was his decision to alert authorities that set the entire sting into motion. As weeks turned into months, the evidence mountain grew. Bank transfers, voice recordings, witness interviews, each detail painting a portrait of a woman trapped by her own words. But with every revelation, Dalia's attorneys found new cracks to exploit. Claims of entrapment, media interference, and police misconduct. And so the stage was set, not just for a trial of guilt or innocence, but for a national debate about truth, manipulation, and morality in the digital age. By the time the case reached the courtroom, it was no longer just about a wife who wanted her husband dead. It had become a symbol of fame gone wrong, of justice in the spotlight, and of how one decision made in secrecy could spiral into a story the entire world would watch unfold. The sirens were gone, the flashing lights, the chaos, all replaced by the solemn hum of a courtroom. This was no longer a police operation, it was justice on display. And Dalia Dippolito was the star witness to her own downfall. The charge, solicitation to commit first-degree murder. The evidence, her own words. And the question before the jury, was this a woman betrayed or a woman who betrayed? The courtroom was packed. Reporters, curious locals, legal observers. Everyone wanted to see the woman whose staged grief had stunned the nation. When the prosecutor stood, the room fell silent. He looked at the jurors, then pressed play. A familiar voice filled the courtroom, Dalia's voice. Calm, certain. "You're sure you want to do this?" the undercover officer asked. She didn't hesitate. "I'm positive, 5,000% sure." The words hung in the air like smoke, undeniable, inescapable. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some jurors shifted, others stared at her with disbelief. This wasn't fiction. It was her. The defense rose quickly, striking back with precision. They said this wasn't a murder plot. It was a setup, a performance. That Dalia was a woman under pressure, manipulated by men with cameras, by police who wanted a perfect headline, and by a system more interested in spectacle than truth. Her lawyer called her a woman trapped in a toxic fantasy, arguing that she believed the meetings were part of an elaborate test, not a real plot, that the police had blurred the line between justice and showmanship. But the prosecution didn't blink. She wasn't acting, they said. She was arranging a murder. Every detail pointed back to Dalia, the money, the photos, the timing, her calm voice, her certainty, her control. And then Dalia herself took the stand. The room leaned forward. She spoke softly, carefully. She said she loved her husband, that she never meant for harm, that the whole thing had been blown out of proportion, a misunderstanding, a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. But her testimony couldn't outrun her own voice on tape. The contradictions were too deep. Every denial met with an echo, her voice, her laughter, her certainty. After hours of closing arguments and whispered deliberation, the courtroom hushed. The jury filed in, solemn. The foreperson stood. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. The words dropped like a stone. Dalia closed her eyes, motionless. Her lawyer exhaled, defeated. And somewhere in the back of the room, Mike Dippolito, the man she once called her soulmate, simply nodded. She was sentenced to 20 years in prison. But if justice seemed final, this case was far from over. Months later, her defense team appealed, arguing that the trial was tainted, that the jury had been biased, that media exposure had poisoned fairness. And against all odds, they won. Her conviction was overturned. In 2016, a second trial began. Once again, the courtroom lights, the tension, the whispers. The defense sharpened their focus. This was never justice, they argued. This was a show, a televised trap. The prosecution fired back with the same chilling evidence, the recordings, the photos, the money. The jury couldn't decide. Mistrial. But fate wasn't done with Dalia yet. A third trial began in 2017, and by then the story had already become legend. A cautionary tale of love, lies, and betrayal. When the verdict came, it was the same as before. Guilty. This time the sentence, 16 years in prison. As the gavel fell, the cameras outside captured the final chapter of a saga that had stretched almost a decade. But the real consequences weren't only legal, they were personal. Mike Dippolito, the man who once gave her everything, spoke rarely, but when he did, his words were heavy. She destroyed my life, not just what I had, but what I believed love was. And then another tragedy. Mohammed Shihadeh, the friend who had first warned police, was found dead in 2021 under mysterious circumstances. By then, every life touched by this story had been altered, careers changed, trust shattered, hearts hardened. In 2020, Dalia's final appeal reached the U.S. Supreme Court. They refused to hear it. Her sentence stands. Her release is expected in 2032. Today, inside a quiet correctional facility in Florida, Dalia Dippolito serves her time, a figure frozen between guilt and infamy. Was she a cold strategist who tried to erase her husband, or a woman caught inside a machine that turned her worst impulses into public theater? The truth, perhaps, lies somewhere between her silence and the echoes of her own voice, saying she was sure, 5,000% sure. In the end, every crime leaves behind more than evidence. It leaves questions about motive, morality, and the fragile line between truth and illusion. Dalia Dippolito's story isn't just about a murder-for-hire plot. It's about control, about a woman desperate to reshape her life, and a man blinded by the hope that love could redeem a broken past. So, what drove her? Was it greed, fear, revenge, or the intoxicating belief that she could manipulate fate itself? Psychologists often speak of narcissistic control, the need to dominate not only circumstances, but people, to craft a world that looks perfect, even if it's built on lies. In Dalia's case, that illusion was everything. A young woman who'd risen from modest beginnings, who'd learned how to use charm as a weapon and attention as a currency. Her world revolved around appearances, wealth, admiration, the approval of strangers. And Mike Dippolito, her husband, became both her symbol of success and her greatest obstacle. He carried the weight of his past, fraud, probation, restitution. But he also carried a kind of naive loyalty, a belief that love could wash away what life had stained. That's what made their story so tragic. He trusted her completely. He believed that the woman smiling beside him was his redemption. She believed he was the final piece of a puzzle she could control, and when control slipped away, She reached for the unthinkable, erasing him. But the Dippolito case also asks a deeper question about justice itself. Because while Dalia was plotting deception, others were filming it. The operation was heavily recorded, publicly broadcast, and dissected across every screen. Millions watched her cry, deny, and plead, not in courtrooms, but in living rooms. And as her image replayed, edited, remixed, judged, a new kind of crime story was born, one where the audience became part of the verdict. Did the cameras change what happened? Did they amplify her guilt or expose it? We may never know. But her story reminds us that in a world obsessed with image, even justice can start to look like performance. And yet, beneath the sensational headlines, there's a quieter, more human truth, the pain left behind. Mike Dippolito will forever carry the scar of betrayal. Mohammed Shihade, the friend who did the right thing, paid a price of his own. And Dalia, for all her poise, her certainty, her ambition, now lives with the consequences of her choices. Every person in this story wanted control, but in the end, control was the first thing they lost. The Dalia Dippolito case is more than a headline. It's a mirror held up to how far people will go to protect an illusion of love, power, and perfection. And perhaps that's the lesson that lingers long after the courtroom closed, that sometimes the most dangerous lies are the ones we tell ourselves. Justice was delivered, but was it truly served? In the courtroom, the verdict seemed clear. Dalia Dippolito, guilty of solicitation to commit murder. Her plans exposed, her lies unraveled, her world collapsed. But behind every headline lies something deeper, a trail of broken hearts and lives that can never return to what they were. Mike Dippolito, once a man rebuilding after his past, was left to confront a truth darker than any sentence, that the woman he loved had ordered his death. Dalia, once confident and calculating, became a symbol of manipulation, deception, and downfall, and somewhere in between, Mohammed, the friend who tried to do what was right, was caught in a storm no one saw coming. There were no real winners here, only the echo of choices that destroyed trust and the haunting reminder that love, when poisoned by deceit, can become something dangerous. As the cameras turned off and the world moved on, the pain remained, quiet, unfilmed, and lifelong. The Dippolito case will be remembered not only for its twists and betrayals, but for how it forced us to ask, what is justice, when the truth itself becomes part of the show? Because in the end, justice may have spoken, but the scars it left behind will forever tell the rest of the story. And as we close this case, remember, behind every shocking crime, there's a heartbeat, a broken promise, and a story that demands to be told. If you found this story compelling, support our work by subscribing to True Crime Wound, where we uncover the truth, one wound at a time. Because every story deserves to be heard, and every truth deserves to be told.